Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Curious Competitor Podcast. I'm your host, current New Jersey Devils defenseman, Carrick. Super excited today to announce our guest, Randy Hetrick. He is the founder of TRX. This was all after achieving his MBA from Stanford University, which was on the back end of a 14-and-a-half-year career as a Navy SEAL squadron commander. He's an exceptional individual. He does not look the other way when challenge comes knocking at his door. I know I learned a lot in this podcast today, and thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world. Let's do this. All right, Randy Hetrick, man, what's up? How you doing today? Where are you at on quarantine here? You out west?
Yeah, I'm in Marin County, which is just across the bridge from San Francisco, and I live in a little town called Mill Valley. And all things considered, it's not a bad place to be quarantined if you got to be quarantined.
yeah.
But I'm up here in my my office over the garage like everybody else, and I'm looking forward to things returning to normal at some point, whatever that new normal may be.
Yeah, me too. Starting to get a little itchy. The Stanley Cup Finals just ended last night with Tampa Bay winning, and congratulations. Sick team, played against them. They were dangerous all year, and ended some added some key parts there at the trade deadline. Blake Coleman was a Devil teammate of mine that went on to win there, well deserved. But Randy, I think when I first Patty Hubbard with Brand Ford, who helps me design the podcast here week in, week out, she recommended you as a guest. Well, first off, I used TRX. So as soon as she brought up, Randy Hetrick with TRX, I was like, oh, so that's sick. I'm familiar with the product. And then she, brought me to speed on your background as, Navy SEAL, and then going on after retirement with the SEALs to, go to the Stanford business school, and then graduating on to be the entrepreneur you are today. As a current athlete, I'm really interested in, for sure, how you have this mindset that's so clearly ambitious for challenge. It's not something you look the other way at, clearly.
Some would call it a pathology, right?
I'll let you say that, yeah.
One that I'm trying to outgrow in my old age, honestly, Connor. It's there's a point in life when you start to realize there's a law of diminishing returns that applies to the pursuit of challenges, right? The pursuit of challenging stuff. So yeah, but it has definitely been a factor in my life for the first, I don't know, I'd like to say half. I'm probably past the half point, but my granny lived to be almost 104, so I've got a pretty good shot, at being maybe at the midpoint now, with a little bit of the benefits of modern medicine that are yet to be developed out there in front of us. But yeah, in the second half, I'd like to maybe back off that challenge meter just a little.
Well, and see, I relate to that because, I'm 26 now. This next season will be my 8th year pro in the National Hockey League. I'd like to think I'm still in the first half, but a 16-year career is no joke. And to play past 35 is a huge accomplishment, especially with how fast the game's gotten. Very similar, where from a performance standpoint, I was always a go guy, very motivated by, especially as a kid, like fear of being cut, jealousy, from what other players had. I wanted what they had. And what I found was as I started to go up the ranks into pro hockey, that fire would burn a little hot. And I would ride the emotional highs and lows of a season to a point where it was taken away from high performance. It was taken away from my ability to stay even keel, and there was just so much comparison to be had if that's what you wanted to do, if you wanted to stay at home at night and consider how you were playing versus another guy that you thought you were as good as, as his career. There's 31 teams playing every night in the National Hockey League that it wasn't sustainable, so sort of the second half of my career, let's call it that, has been, really trying to pursue the same. How do I keep the same grit and competitive edge at the rink, where, I want to take someone's head off, but also, dialing it back come family time. I am married. I just told you before we started, my wife and I announced we're pregnant, last week. So a couple different roles come into my life here, in the next 6 to 10 months.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, to even be thinking about that at the age that you're at, I think is a sign of, an evolved EQ, because I want to say, in my 20s, I was so focused on, being the best frogman that I could be on the next, getting to the next level, whatever that level was. It was never, the level where I was never good enough for me.
Yeah.
And it was always this, this idea that there's a peak to get to that is above the one that I stand on right now. And I think, that's a healthy instinct for sure for a person that wants to achieve some significant level of accomplishment. Because if you're not driven that way, then doing stuff that is extraordinary is there's sort of extraordinary is a synonym for hard in a lot of ways too, right? It requires a huge amount of commitment, a huge amount of time, risk, all the things that go with extraordinary achievement. And, if you don't have that as a motivating driver, then you're probably not going to, you're not going to get that high on your climb. But at some point you start to realize, right, well, how high is high enough, right? And where is that place where you can sort of spiritually get to homeostasis and shift your focus a little more towards some of the stuff like you're talking about. You got a kid coming. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Kids will change everything in your life, mostly for the better, but they'll change everything. And that takes a significant amount of energy, and you want to be a great dad or mom. And so at some point you have to start, trying to figure out how to transition your brain from just this singular, the way I describe it is I used to have, this big, bongo drum that would just drum loudly that would drive me toward my next goal. And, over time, I'm starting to feel that, the drum's a little softer, and maybe it's more like a snare drum now, not so much the giant bongo, but it, I think that's a sign of, of evolution and maturity. And at some point, you need to arrive at that homeostasis where you're happy with what you've achieved. You've got some good challenges maybe still ahead of you, even if they're not quite as epic as the ones that you have in your rearview mirror. And, you start to evolve into a little bit more of a, people use comfort zone negatively, but wouldn't it be nice to live life in a comfort zone if you could figure out how to do it? And, I think that's part of the next part of my journey is figuring out how to still take on, fun challenges, but do it for the sake of the fun, the learning, accomplishing something cool, and not quite so much just to prove, right, that I can do it. And it's a different mindset.
Oh, that's beautifully put. And Randy, so how do we get to today, as the founding operator of TRX? It's an awesome training vehicle that I've had in every weight room that I've ever played on from the US development team on now. It's 1997, you're a Navy SEAL at the time. How does TRX come to be?
Well, the original, TRX today is a much broader stanced training brand, right, than it obviously was when I started. Today we sell pretty much everything that you would train on that isn't a machine, right? We kind of draw the line at if it doesn't have, hinges or tracks, then it's probably in our wheelhouse. Once you go to machines, then, there's other people that do great machines, and that's where we stop. We sort of define ourselves as, living within the functional training realm.
Yep.
But way back when in 1997, right, number one, there was no TRX, and there wasn't even an inkling in my eye of that there would ever be a TRX. I was just trying to solve a problem on a deployment where, we would deploy, and you guys, I'm sure faced this at some level in your career. Back at home, you've got an amazing facility, everything you need, but then you get on the road, right? And a lot of that goes away. And I would guess even with the, probably the reciprocal agreements that you guys have when you travel, you still don't have your full complement of stuff, right? That's your usual your usual stuff. Well, imagine, as a commando, like you got nothing. Like you deploy, the last thing you load up on the pallet is, weights, right? Much less a treadmill or,
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you're deploying with operational gear, and whether it's a, a mission or whether it's a training mission, it's still the same. There's always this battle over, how little stuff you have room for. Everybody always thinks that, we need more room for more stuff. And so training gear is one of the easy things to knock off the list. And so we would deploy, all around the world, and you'd get there and then you'd have nothing to do. And depending on where you were and what the complexion of the deployment was, you may or may not have the luxury to go out and go for a run, right? If you're on an actual operation,
Yeah.
You're certainly not doing that. But even in a lot of the training deployments, like, you don't just take off in the third world for a run, right? There's a lot of risks that come with that kind of stuff. So you end up stuck in a confined area trying to figure out how to stay in shape. And on one of these ops that I was on, I was trying to figure out how to train the climbing muscles to get up the side of a ship on a caving ladder, right, with a bunch of gear on my back. And there wasn't anything in this little warehouse where I was hanging out to do pull-ups on. And I had accidentally deployed with my jiu-jitsu belt that I'd scooped up off the ground with my flight suit stuffed in a bag and didn't realize I had it. And I got over there and I'm like, well, what the hell am I going to do with this thing? And then I just literally had this spark of inspiration was staring at a bathroom door. And I thought, what if I tied a knot in the end of this thing? And I threw the strap over the top of the door and closed the door. I wonder if I could lean back and load, my body. And SEALs have a big tradition of body weight training. And I'd been a wrestler before that. So same thing, a lot of body weight, a lot of rope climbing, a lot of pull-ups, and I had that orientation. And for some reason, I just got this sort of spark of inspiration to try to recreate this motion, right? But loaded. And so I went over and hung back off this jiu-jitsu belt, and it had no handle, which was great because that worked on your grip.
Yep. Like towel pull-ups or something similar.
Yeah, like towel pull-ups. And then which again, from martial arts, right, from jiu-jitsu, you're always doing, hanging off each other's gis and strengthening your grip. And I thought about the move and I leaned back against gravity and then I pulled myself up, right? And then I leaned back again, pulled myself up and thought, damn, that actually works pretty well. Got a little more body angle on it, loaded it up more, and it was more than enough weight, right, to train that. And today, right, all I was doing was trying to create a movement for my sport, right, that I could reinforce in my training. And today we call that, functional training. It's pretty much the definition of functional training. And it just, it kind of took off, as from being on a team full of alpha males, right? The first thing they do is mock you. And then very quickly after that, they're like, all right, get out of the way. Let me try this thing, and it just kind of took off. And buddies started saying to me, hey boss, make me one of your gizmos. I'm going on the road. And I had another buddy who was a parachute rigger who liked to drink beer. So we cooked up this little, relationship where he would call me and say, hey, can I make, Connor, one of your gizmos? And I'd say, sure. And then you'd buy him a case of beer and you'd get your gizmo, which is what we lovingly called it at the time. And that was it, man. And it just kind of, I optimized it to a point, but I wasn't viewing this at all as a business. It was just this cool tool that I'd come up with and guys liked it. And that was that, right? And I didn't really think about turning it into a business until after I had left service and went to business school at Stanford. And when I was there, I had the good fortune to get invited out to train in the athlete training center. And I'd go out there with my goofy straps and hook them up to the squat racks. And any excuse not to study, right? So I was in pretty good shape. And I'd obviously been at this whole training business for a long time. So, the coaches who were in there with their teams would look over and be like, what in the hell is that guy doing? And they would always come up and ask me, hey, what is this thing? First they'd ask, like, why are you so old? Because I was about 36 at the time, right? Everybody else wandering around and there's like 18, 20. And And then, I'd tell them about it. And 10 minutes later, they'd be asking me if I could make them for their team. And they'd be telling me all the things that this weird contraption, which is like the lowest tech fitness product in history, but they would be describing for me all the things they thought it would do for their athlete. And that was interesting, right? You're at business school, you're thinking about business, and I just kind of decided, wow, maybe there's something in this. And, I used the second year at business school. I used the first year to kind of kick the tires on the idea a little bit, used the summer to really dig in and start, trying to answer some of the questions, like where would I get this made? How would I, if I were going to evolve it into something a bit more gentrified, how would I do that? So I spent the summer between, my first and second year at business school, kind of in my garage optimizing the straps. And then I flew over to Hong Kong and, found somebody who would take pity on me and make like little tiny, short runs, because I was not buying a lot of inventory. Yeah, right. And by the second year, I'd kind of decided, all right, I think I'm going to give this a go, and I'll use every class in my second year at Stanford as an incubator, basically, to build the marketing plan, build the finance plan, think through how I'm going to build a team and a culture and all the things that go with being an entrepreneur. And then, after I graduated in middle of 2003, I just decided, all right, I guess this is time like the present.
How was that transition going from the service, a very alpha male? Like I doubt you use the same language and same tone, with your SEAL team members as you would, in a classrooms, for example, at business school. And I'm curious, just because I'm going to be, in that boat someday where my career is over and there is going to be a second act.
Yeah, well, transitions are not easy, right? They, and I don't envy you when you make your transition, because I'm sure you're going to go through, a lot of the same things that I did, and that every other, anybody who's ever served in an elite unit, sports unit, military unit, it really doesn't matter. If you came from a place where you'd been this certain thing for a long time and you'd worked really hard to get there, and you were very proud, right, of what you'd done and of the contributions that you and your teammates had made, and really that sense of camaraderie of being part of this team that, that does things that are unusual and extraordinary and important. Man, when you suddenly are no longer part of that team, there is I guess I would describe it as sort of an emotional vertigo that happens, where no matter how much you think you're confident in who you are and in your abilities, you really go through this really significant fall. And I had one of the most privileged transitions from the military that I could imagine, right? I went from being the squadron commander at the Special Missions Unit to Stanford Business School. That is hardly a hard knocks transition. And yet, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And trying to regain my grounding, trying to, recast myself first for myself, and then in the eyes of everyone else. It was hard, man. And it took me a number of years to kind of get to peace with, I'm no longer a Navy SEAL, right? I'm an ex-Navy SEAL, and now I'm an entrepreneur. And at that point, a fledgling one, right? Without many accomplishments, and with a huge host of challenges out in front of me. Yeah. And it was hard, man. I mean, it was one of those things you definitely want to get yourself ready for, and just understand that no matter what kind of plan you think you have, you're probably gonna struggle a little bit.
Yeah, the way I've always pictured it was like having to have a literal funeral, like this identity, this part of you that I've spent, so much time integrating into my DNA. Since I was 4 years old, I've played this game, and every single day I wake up, bang, it's hockey time, bang. Like, when's the next game? When's the next practice? I'm 26 now. It's been 22 years. It's been my entire consciousness, since I was a young boy. And, but part of that we were talking about before we started the podcast about why I started. And part of it was to have some of these conversations. Maybe I have my TRX moment, listening to, another podcast or another guest talk about, whatever their market needs, sort of how, your fellow servicemen started to tip their hand that they were part of the market for what you were going to eventually sell in the straps. I think, so one of the big turning points, what were some of the big turning points in the success of TRX? I understand, a lot of athletes took to it right away. I think we've always tried to reverse engineer our results, similar to, your thought process around, okay, if I want to train the climbing muscles, this is what these movements have to look like. And this is what, the relationship with gravity's got to be. Very similar where, when I'm training, I'm trying to think of, okay, what are, the high rate, rate of return skills out there? For sure, the best players in the league is skating. Okay, so what training styles would, benefits skating? But when it comes to, turning points, like trampoline moments for the company, after, the initial struggle, I'm assuming was tough, with the small order numbers and that. What were some of the marquee moments that have gotten you to the, size that TRX is today?
Well, I mean, we started something that was pretty hard, which is that there were no straps, right? There weren't any. The closest thing was gymnastics rings, but that was CrossFit's infancy as well when I was starting out, and they hadn't really figured out or popularized rings yet. So rings were basically viewed as something gymnasts used in the gymnasium, right? And so trying to convince people, you can imagine talking to your strength conditioning coach and, me trying to convince him or her that, you really ought to be giving this strappy thing, some time. And people would look at it and be like, look, dude, do you see me? I lift a little bit of weight. Maybe you didn't notice, right? What am I going to do with your cute little strap? And that was challenging. And I would honestly, I probably did 500 gym pitches in the first 3 years this business was alive. Backpack full of straps. I'd call, I'd find the fitness manager, I'd beg, borrow, steal to get 30 minutes of their next staff training hour, because they would schedule these things monthly. Yeah. And I'd say, look, I'll leave a few of these behind to compensate the gym for the opportunity. And then I'd get in there, and for 30 minutes, man, I'd sing for my supper in front of, a dozen, 2 dozen trainers. And generally what I'd have to do is immediately take the biggest, baddest, like stink eye looking dude in the group, and then quickly get him on the straps and crush him, right? But let him crush himself.
Right.
And then I'd have to backpedal really quickly, because everybody else would be like, well, shit, if this thing crushes Connor, I don't have any clients that can use this, right? So I'd have to backpedal, and I'd say, okay, now look, we just showed some of the most advanced stuff with Connor, because of course I want to make you feel good and successful, right?
Yeah, nothing creates an open mind like some humiliation,
Yeah, well, but if you leave somebody feeling humiliated, especially guys with big egos, right? They may say, screw that guy, screw that thing. Yeah. So it was this, I had to learn quickly this art of taking somebody out of their comfort zone, but then quickly backpedaling back into the realm of the average Joe and complimenting, the guy who was brave enough to step up and be subjected to that little trial. And then I'd get everybody on it, and I'd run around and try to make everybody as successful and comfortable as possible. And then I'd walk out of there not knowing whether, did I hit any of the targets that I was shooting at in there? But usually 1 or 2 would come up, and they were always kind of the early adopters, right? The folks that were interested in mastering their craft and getting some competitive advantages. And they'd come up and be like, I'm interested in this. How do I follow up with you? And so that was one kind of phase of the business that was both challenging but also inspiring, because every time you'd peel off a couple more people from that group, and your database of interested parties keeps growing, you start to realize, like, all right, people who know their craft and who wouldn't patronize this product if it didn't work or they didn't believe in it, they're starting to show interest. So that was one of them. And, then I went to a trainer trade show pretty early in the business, and we sold out everything we had. And that was another one of those moments when you're like, all right, somebody loves me, right? Maybe not, everybody, not yet, but somebody loves me, and somebody who understands how fitness and kinesiology sort of work has made the assessment that, this is going to add something to the state of the art. And so, you sort of, I don't view, I've told people this before, like the tipping point in the sort of Gladwellian sort of way. I don't know that in my experience there's been a single one. I think there have been a series of them, and I kind of liken them to false summits, right? If you're out in the woods and you're trying to summit a mountain, you're going to run into false summits several times along the way, because that's how mountain ridges work, right? You see the highest point from your vector, then you get up to the top of it and you realize that not only is it not the highest point, but in fact, I got to go down into a canyon, right? And then you get to the next one and repeat. And, it's only like way later that you actually get to the top of the summit. And so I think tipping points are that way, right? Each one propels you a little higher, but most times for most people, there's not one giant tipping point. When Drew Brees, when we got to help Drew recover from his labral tear, and then he ended up, getting on the Cinderella story with the Saints and Katrina, and then they won the Super Bowl, and Drew was the Super Bowl MVP. That was a huge help to us, because he had become a good buddy of mine and was a big fan of what we had helped him, recover from. And then he was just a great guy that took good care of us at every chance he had.
That's awesome.
He'd pitch us on what we'd done for him, and that helped a lot, because it got a lot of guys like you, who might have been sitting there reading Sports Illustrated, right, suddenly going, what's this strap thing? I might have to check this out, right? And suddenly every strength conditioning coach who all read Sports Illustrated, right, they started going, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I need to check this out. And so, that was a series of them that I just described, that all kind of kept encouraging me and my tiny team that we were on the right track.
Super cool. That's super cool. And what I think has been one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you on the podcast, because, two fields that I really enjoy learning from. One is the entrepreneurial side. I think the world of business is just filled with brilliant people, super creative, super persistent. And they're usually very open with their stories. Athletes, not as much. Sometimes we're a little bit more closer to the vest. We finally got, the Jordan documentary out, on, a couple months ago. That was awesome. But when it comes down to, there's two sides of you that I think are super cool, is, your time in the service as a Navy SEAL, and now your successful entrepreneurial venture. As an athlete, what are, some lessons that you've been able to draw independently from each, that if you could gift me something in terms of your advice and, your 2 cents on something that you wish you could teach most athletes, right? You're friends with Drew. I'm sure you're a sports fan. What advice would you give to an athlete like myself?
Well, I try not to be in the advice giving business too often, because it implies that you really know, what the hell you're doing. And of course, none of us really do. We all just sort of do our best at it. But, from the perspective of a guy that's 54 years old and has been in the physical game for a long time, right? Long time as an athlete, a long time as a tactical athlete, and then subsequently as an entrepreneur, making his living in athletics and fitness, right? So I've got a pretty long view of the domain. And I think that one of the reasons why people in business like to hire athletes, accomplished athletes, is because the level of discipline and sort of self analysis that's required to achieve a high level of athletic performance ends up converting really, really well in the business world. Certainly in the world of small business, you really have to be hard-headed and hard driving, because there's just an endless series of headwinds that you face. And once a business has been around 30, 40, 50 years, they still have challenges, but they're different challenges. They're not breakthrough challenges, right? They're sort of sustainment challenges. And so, I know a lot of early stage entrepreneurs really love hiring athletes. And I think that, if you think about the things that have made you successful as an athlete, it tends to be, number one, you got to have that internal drive. And you have to be driven at some level by a fear of failure and underperformance. That's just sort of what drives most of us, right? And you also need to look at your career, not just, I think you said it when we were chatting before, it's not either just the long run or just the short run, because if you focus on one or the other, you end up missing part of the puzzle. You got to be short-term focused. And I always tell people that, the way that I know to get through hard things is I always focus on the next 10 meters of trail. Right. And I've been focused on that since I was going through selection and teams. If you set your sights too far in the future and you keep your attention out there, life's too hard, because you'll hit setbacks. You'll start to, the guys that quit during buds are the ones that they lost their perspective that, hey, if I just chip away at the next evolution that's in front of me, and then that leads to the next one, and pretty soon I'm through this day, and then I just start thinking about tomorrow. I don't start thinking about next month. I start thinking about tomorrow. Then each day I can win. I can have little victories, right, that build toward a big victory. If I start thinking about, oh my God, we're only 3 weeks into this torture, and I got another 6.5 months of this, well, then I start psyching myself out, right? And if you were thinking, all I want in life is to be the most valuable player in the league. All right, well, that's a good goal. But if that's how you're defining, right, your success, the odds are you're going to realize at some point, yeah, maybe I'm not ever going to be that. And then what's that do to you, right? It sort of deflates you.
Deflates, yeah, momentum.
Yeah, so you really need to, focus on the short term so that you're executing, you're creating new victories that you can celebrate for yourselves, and you're actually making progress. But you also have to have in mind the idea that, all right, if I want to be in this game for a long time, I got to take care of my body, not just beat Jesus out of it, right? I have to pay attention to sleep. I have to pay attention to my mental health. I have to pay attention to my family, because those things will break you, right? And a lot of times young guys don't realize how derailing things like, an overuse injury can become, a family meltdown, right? A lot of careers get ended from divorce, and it's not because of the divorce. It's because of all of the cloudiness that creates, and the distractions, and the mental stresses and pressures. So I think that, you got to take a long view if you want to be in your career as an NHL player, but for anyone else, you have to take that long view and make sure that you're not doing things in the short term that are working at cross purposes to you surviving and thriving in your chosen vocation, over the course of a decade, not just over the course of a month or a quarter or a year.
Yeah, I like that, because I've dealt with that earlier in my career, where I would go into seasons and I think I just expected perfect years. Like I was just shocked at, I'd be pulled off a power play, or I'd get hurt, and I would think, this season just isn't going the way I wanted to. And now I'm a little older. I've been through it, and I've been able to train that ability to have a more realistic plan. So like one of the things I'll do, we'd normally be in training camp right now. But in August, like you start to get on the ice, you train all summer long. So the first month, if you're out around the first, round of the playoffs, it's like May, maybe you take it, mostly just training. And then June, you're on the ice, 3 times a week. July is 4 or 5. And then August is 5 and 6. And you're really starting to ramp up for training camp. One of the things I've started to do is picture, like, go through the emotional tolls and just think to myself, am I ready. Like you can't go through the storm expecting not to get wet. Like you can't go through a hockey season expecting to wake up, fresh as daisies every day after the night before. Like you're going to get hit from behind, you're going to get pucks, to you. And I think that I had a better relationship with momentum that way and resiliency that way where, I don't want to say that I stopped setting goals. I started to set goals that were just more realistic. I started to appreciate the ups and downs of a year and just how the perfect season doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, you just described a metaphor for life too, by the way, if you didn't notice. I mean, it really is. It's a lot of this stuff, presumably when I'm 75, there'll be a lot of shit that'll be clear to me that I don't see right now, but there's a lot of stuff that's clear to me now that I didn't see at 25. And I think that reappraisal of your goal set as you go along is really important. One of the things you mentioned in there briefly was just the way that you mesh in with the team. And I know that when you look at older athletes, the particularly ones that have the longest, most successful careers, they have to have an evolution from me to we, right? There's an interesting, because initially we all want to be the playmaker. We want to be the driver. We want to be the guy on the stage, right? We want to will our individual contribution to achieve whatever our goal is. And then as time goes by, there's definitely a shift that has to happen toward, all right, what becomes more important is the team's victory, right? Like how the team, and even not winning or losing necessarily, but victory in a more holistic sense. Like, are we performing to our ability? Are we, generally winning more than we're losing? Is it a well-functioning organization, right? Are the guys in the case of a sports team, are they relating reasonably well to each other? Do we have all kinds of internal garbage that that's cropping up, or is it a pretty harmonious team? And as you get older, your role as an individual contributor has to become a bit less of an all-star and a bit more of a mentor, right? And some glue that holds the group together.
Yeah, the glue
for
guys.
for a couple reasons, right? Number one, your physical abilities decline. That's just like the hard reality. It's you're approaching like the zenith of your physical career, right, in your late 20s. Yep. And after that, it doesn't mean you can't still perform at a very high level. It just means that it gets a little harder. Your fast twitch is not quite as fast as it used to be. And so you might have to become more of an endurance guy, because mid-30s, right, is where most people's endurance sort of peak. So you just have to constantly be reappraising, hey, how can I add value and stay in my wheelhouse, right, as a contributor? And I'm doing that right now, honestly. Like, in case you think it's like, yeah, sure, an old graybeard guy, it's easy to talk. I'm doing it right now. I'm recasting myself. I have moved out of the CEO role in charge of the operational day-to-day at TRX, and I'm shifting more into promoter-in-chief, right? And I'm focusing on some of the areas where my long-standing knowledge in the industry and my aptitude as a kind of a MacGyver ghetto engineer, allow me to create solutions to problems that I've seen for a long time in the industry, but nobody's solved. Well, why not? I can solve that. So, so my role is changing. Again, every time I think that I've sort of reached stasis, I realize, the only constants change. Now I'm shifting into another role. And I'm starting to think about some new ventures that I believe there's an opportunity for that nobody's tackled. And so that's an example of, even as a business guy, I think a lot of entrepreneurs hang on so long. Entrepreneurs tend to be great at the startup phase and the creation phase, but they're not temperamentally suited, for the most part, for that maintenance corporate manager phase. But if you don't have somebody who really is flourishing as a corporate manager, then your organization, once it reaches scale, it'll wallow and fail, right? Instead of continuing to grow, but bigger and more slowly on a larger base and with more process. And that's really not my gig, right? That's not what turns me on. So if I were to, doggedly adhere to that role and say, no, by God, I founded this thing and I'm going to run it till the day that, it dies. Well, it may die sooner than I wanted it to, right? And so instead, I'm trying to recast myself in the best area of sort of my wheelhouse of expertise and the wheelhouse in terms of my ability to contribute the most to my organization. So that would be a piece of advice I would offer to a guy like you, right? Is as your career keeps progressing, start to, I know you would say you've been a great team player the whole time, and I don't doubt that, but I don't think it's undeniable that early in your career, you focus more on your own individual contributions and what you can, what you can achieve than later in your career, where you should be really starting to focus on, hey, how can I help the team in whatever way the team needs me to win, as a team and to function well as a team.
Yeah, I like that. And it's something that I, even with starting this podcast, but part of it was to allow for young kids or maybe parents who, are looking at their child, boy or girl that's playing hockey or maybe another sport, and they're thinking about the development, similar to, the way my dad did. My dad was, we had hard conversations around my skating ability. Connor, if you want to play like the guys on TV, your skate doesn't look like that. We got to get you with the right, person or coach. Puck skills. Are you shooting the puck hard enough? Are you doing these things? But there's also a personal development side. Like, you have to be humble enough to engage in that self-reflection. You have to be, have a real sense of what you bring to the room so that you can be dynamic enough. Hockey, pro hockey particularly, has this, there's this unique give and pull between I have to show up as my strengths and what I've always been in the game, but I've got to tailor them enough to what this team, this coach needs for the year and particularly on a smaller scale for today. And I don't know if that's something in the first half of my career I really spent a lot of time trying to develop, was how can I be a leader in the room today? How can I be a better teammate? What do I think the team really needs? And I just was at a place where I wasn't picking my head up and trying to see what other people needed. I was trying to swim myself. I was trying to stay in the league myself and figure my own game out. And I'm still doing that. I think, the past couple of years I've had, some injuries and, some high points in that year and some low points, but, it's definitely something I'll, try and bring a little bit on a more consistent basis, moving forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the guys, if you think, look across sport in your league and in other leagues, like the guys that started really promising and then flamed out early, a lot of times are the guys who won't open themselves up to input, right? They're just, it's their way or the highway. And I think that when somebody takes that position and they're not comfortable soliciting, much less taking feedback on their, how they could be better, I think they sort of reach an early peak, and and then they struggle, and then they start to fail, and then they quit, right, or they get dropped, and so I think that part of really maximizing your potential has to be the willingness to look at your own vulnerabilities and weak spots and ask for help, right, to shore them up. Because that's the only way that you keep growing. And if you conversely, if you are open to feedback and you do have a realistic, appraisal of your limitations and your weak spots, you can reach out, find mentors, right? Get help from whatever, your skating coach, from a strength conditioning specialist, like wherever the chinks in your armor are, ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It only makes them get worse, right, with time. And so instead, you need to be like, hey, I got something I need to, buff out here and weld in a new plate so that I can be, my armor will be better than it was before, and not feel bad or intimidated to admit, that, hey, I got some stuff I need to work on. Because if you look at most of the epic, legends of sport, most of them were people who absolutely, they left no stone unturned about how they could get better. Some of them do all kinds of kooky stuff, right, in their exploration processes. But over time, that pays off.
Do you have any practices or mentors, I guess, that have helped you remain open-minded and sort of humble enough to know where your strengths and weaknesses are and when to get out of your own way?
Well, I mean, I've had a lot of good mentors, and the military tends to have a mentoring tradition. So you kind of, from the time you join a unit, you either get assigned or you adopt, the one or two guys in the unit that you're going to look to as mentors. And so I kind of came up with that. So I've had a lot of great mentors in my business career. I developed mentors when I was at Stanford with the staff, there that I've continued to lean on. In terms of staying humble, I mean, life keeps handing you ass whoopings, right? And if you're paying attention, how could you not be humble? I mean, I probably made a lot more mistakes than I've made brilliant decisions, and those all hurt. And as long as you're paying attention, like, you don't forget those. And so, I mean, ego is a double-edged sword, right? If you don't have enough of it, you'll never get anywhere. If you have too much of it, you'll never get anywhere. And so it's finding that mid zone where you're confident in your abilities and headstrong, to a certain extent in your beliefs of how to achieve your best performance, but you're also not so egotistical that you lose focus of the broader team objectives, or that you convince yourself, to believing that you're omnipotent and invincible and therefore cannot open yourself up to advice from other people. That's a losing path, right? And so you got to thread the needle between the two of them, and it's not easy because guys that are and gals as well that are alpha type, performers, yeah, they all have big egos. It's part of the ticket to the dance, right? We all do, and you just have to figure out how to keep yours in check.
Yeah, there was a quote above our, where we'd fill our water bottles up at the development team, Team USA. And he used to say, I think it was a Jim Collins quote, and it was like, good is the enemy of great. And it was something that I always took with me and started to remember as I kind of came up through the league, and I would keep tabs on players. Like, okay, I think, maybe there were guys I was playing against, in junior. I'd be like, okay, I can see that player. I think he's got, good NHL package. I think I'll see him, down the road, when I'm able to make it. And, it's interesting where once a certain player believes that they are particularly good at something, that kind of signifies the day that they stop learning. They stop practicing it at the same rate they did before they realized it was good. So like, that's one of the things that I asked earlier in my career, like, what do you do well? I say, I skate well. And now I'm at a point where I'm seeing how fast the NHL game is getting. It's like, I'm a good skater, not good enough. Like it's gotta get better at a rate that, maybe I'd always worked on my skating, but now I really got to work on it because this game's getting quick. And I think, very similar with hockey. I think my dad was a big one for me, big mentor and developer of how I thought, competitively in the game. I've had some good coaches, leaders. It's not I wonder if it's as open as it is in the military. Because I think in hockey, it's a little bit not as obvious, the mentorship sometimes that's going on. Like, it's almost on the responsibility of the younger player to take note, because if a younger player seems to come in like they know it all, or, that they're too good to be told anything, older guys aren't going to bend over backwards to try and help you. Like, you want to be stubborn and run yourself right out of the league. That's fine. Like, I don't want to play with that kind of guy anyway, so there's a little bit of a give and take there where you've got to show up with the stuff, knowing you're good enough to play every day. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned from, some of those older players if you're willing to ask for them, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think as an older player, right, you really want to start. I mean, I don't know how many more years, you hope to have in the league. Where you mid-career maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I want to play till I'm 40. That's what I say. So I'm
So
26.
in
I'm playing a
hockey,
long
man,
time.
that's a big ask, right?
I'm into some, I'm into the longevity stuff and the training, and I'm pretty investigative that way. And, I'm going to be as innovative as I have to be to, stay in the league as long as I can. Cause I hear right? I hear all the older guys say, they don't come to the rink like spring chickens. Like they're not, bouncing on each toe after game 60, they're doing this out of the car with their second venti, coffee on the way to the rink. And I still admire the hell out of it. Like it's incredible. Guys played, I played with Travis Zajac, Patrick Marleau's got like 1,700 games, and you're just thinking to yourself, like, how has this guy withstood that level of punishment? And I think one of the things that I was able to learn early in my career was, okay, these older guys clearly have some physical challenges. Like they've gone through war, they've put their body through hell. I need to prepare for that and keep the mileage off the best I can. And it's a fun puzzle. I try to solve it every day.
Yeah, well, I would guess that the older guys that are still in the league have also probably been really diligent in all their maintenance, right, and taking care of themselves, because that's such a physical game. And as they go along, like the point I was going to make is that I think that the older you get in your respective profession, the more that you can and should be offering your perspective as a mentor, because certainly a guy that's been in a league for 10 years has a lot to offer to somebody who's coming in. And I think that's that example that I was talking about before. You just got to keep redefining your goal set. Maybe you're not going to past 35 ever be the fastest guy on the ice anymore, right? So having that as your goal is just going to be self-defeating. If instead you start to refashion yourself as, hey, I'm more of a rink general, right? I've got so much experience now. I've seen 1,700 games. I'm going to focus my energies more in that area, right? And start to, I'm going to be as fast as I can be, but I'm going to acknowledge that, I can't skate at the same speed that I could when I was 25. And I think that's one of those, sounds obvious, but it's kind of a process in life that if you're mindful of it, I think you can keep redefining your goals in a way that you can be both successful and happy with that transition, right? That evolution that is going to happen, right? Like there's no one who gets away from it. No one.
Yeah, no kidding. And so for you personally, and we'll end here because I want to be respectful of your time, but Randy, what is next for you? What is next for TRX in your world?
Well, this whole pesky little COVID virus has really been a I don't know what to call it, a transformational experience. It's put pressure on us in some areas of the business, the commercial side of the fitness industry, the clubs and the athletic training facilities have all gotten flattened. So pre-COVID, half our business was commercial and the other half was consumer. Now for the moment, the percentage is significantly different than that. It's predominantly consumer. But that's given us some opportunities, right? And one of them is that we have had to embrace the reality that virtual training is a thing. And it's a thing that if you want to be a leading brand, you're going to have to master that thing. So we've been shifting a lot of resources into developing systems and processes to deliver training virtually through Zoom and other Zoom-like technologies, and that's pretty much it spans our entire business. The education that we do for trainers, it's shifted into the virtual realm. The workout content that we sell to consumers, it's shifted into the virtual realm, and that's all great. Because if you embrace it rather than fight it, one of the things that we've learned is that it vastly increases your reach, right? Like if you're doing everything in a physical realm, you're limited, right? You have one training center, for instance, or 10 or whatever. Suddenly you go virtual. Well, the internet is infinite, and so we're finding that simple little things. Like here's a dumb but profound example. Maybe in our training center, it was packed all the time. We'd get 25 people in there at a time. Well, you run that same class virtually, and suddenly you got people signing on from Israel and Egypt and Belarus and Mexico, and you got a class that's bigger than the one that you would have had just with internationals. Then you've got people from every state in the union here in the United States, and so we're realizing that there's some scale advantages that that are open to us, and we're leaning into those. So a lot of energy is going into virtual training, technologies, virtual training, processes, and figuring out how to deliver a really great experience, to our various constituents in that realm. That's one of the areas that we're really focused on. And then one of the other areas is we watched a lot of trainers and coaches over the course of their career struggling with the things that trainers and coaches struggle with. And so we've spent a lot of time working on solutions to solve those. And we're also launching a big subscription service for training pros to really, think more like a, Microsoft for business or any of the big enterprise software companies, the way they create an entire suite of business services for a variety of different businesses. We're working on that for people who make their living in the training realm. So we're going to try to bring, help trainers and coaches build better businesses and reduce some of the frictions in their life. So those are a couple of the big things we're working on. And we got a couple more that I can't talk about just yet, but I'll tell you when they break.
Sounds good. Randy, this was awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on the Curious Competitor podcast. I had a blast, and you got a friend in hockey, man. If you ever want to come out, watch some guys, try and get in on the forecheck and punch each other's heads in, I think that might be right up your alley. I know what you're into.
When you start traveling again and get out here, Connor, I'll have to come watch you play. That'll be good fun.
Sounds good. Really appreciate your time, Randy.
Yeah, man, it was a pleasure. Good luck to you, and I will be an even bigger fan going forward. Now I'll watch you move into the next phase of your career.
Yeah, it's time for me to stop fucking around, frankly. I had a couple surgeries the last couple of years and was poised, I thought, game-wise to take the next step. But, that goes. Like, sometimes you just got to wait a little bit. Even, Tampa Bay Lightning last year, they were a juggernaut last year, swept in the first round. And then this year they're able to go on and win. I think that pain's just part of it. It
is. And make sure one piece of advice I will give you, man, make sure that you enjoy it while you're in it, because I can tell you, you blink and it's over. And as hard as you want to work and as many great things as you want to achieve, make sure that you don't miss the opportunity also to take it all in, right, and appreciate it while you got it. Because I who would have, I can remember like yesterday, showing up to Buds, getting ready to take on the biggest challenge that I could ever imagine, becoming a Navy SEAL. And goddamn, it seemed like I blinked and I was walking out the gate of the Special Missions Unit and I was headed to business school, and 14 and a half years just like that. Right. So make sure you enjoy it as you're rolling along the ice.
Oh, will do. Really appreciate that. First off, I want to say thank you to Randy for, his time and sharing his story with us today, with me and with you, our listener. I do want to talk about a couple takeaways I thought were particularly fun to learn from him during this podcast. Was number one, he said, extraordinary is a synonym for hard. And that's his whole take on that, the whole military background and how they look at challenge as a part of the process and as a fun part of the process, something that they really look forward to, is something that as athletes, I try to channel. It's maybe not something as totally ingrained in us as we, normally enjoy more of the skill side of that, but just their appreciation for what is hard and how they look forward to going through this process that is doing something hard to become extraordinary, I think is something Randy embodied, very clearly in this podcast today. Another quote he had was about how he would just focus on the 10 meters of trail in front of him during buds, and not really looking up at the tall task that was, his bigger goals all the time. He really had a way to mentally engage with his goals to make them smaller, more digestible, where he was able to get that funny force of momentum on his side to achieve really big and hard things. And it's clear that, even as an entrepreneur, he's been able to have this self-reflection that's been really fueling for him, no matter what he's going through. And the third piece of advice, that Randy gave to both of us today was be wary of advice. The facts are we're all trying to figure this out. And it's kind of the day I remember really becoming an adult was realizing how difficult other adults had it, and how we're all just trying to, even the people that I most looked up to in the world, we're still just trying to figure this whole life thing out, trying to figure out the best way to pursue, their ambitions while balancing or at least having checks and balances for the imbalances that comes with pursuing high goals, and also trying to maintain a family life, maintain, physical, mental, spiritual health. I think be wary of advice. Only we are fully aware of our, personal circumstance. And I think as long as we're able to get still, and I'm going to try not to offer too advice here, but usually the answer is within us there somewhere. So to all of our listeners, thank you for joining Randy and I today. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe to the Curious Competitor podcast. Really helps us continue to grow. Please share with a friend. A lot of leadership tidbits in here, high performance tidbits in here that if you think of a loved one that you think could benefit from the podcast, please share. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you again next week.